thank you for the people that are here. This is one of the more important talks, and we would have probably liked for more people to be in attendance, but thank you for being here. What makes this interesting is Dan is here in his capacity as an operator solving some of the climate problems, particularly in agtech. Saeed is an ex-operator, but currently an investor as part of Global Ventures, a sophisticated investor, early stage, that's investing in climate as well. And Namir sits somewhere in the middle as an ecosystem enabler and as a founder himself, helping every business become a sustainable business in some capacity. But to kind of gauge before we get started on how the audience feels, raise your hand if you think climate change or global warming are a top 3 issue in your opinion. That is quite a show of hands. Keep your hand up if you know how we're going to solve for climate change. Oh, that's fantastic. This is going to be delightful. I want to start kind of from a landscape standpoint with you, Saeed. To decarbonize fully by mid-century, a sizable percentage of GDP will be poured into climate tech companies. Every region is different. Every region has its own set of challenges. In your point of view, what are some of the biggest opportunities in the region, particularly in climate, and how can we accelerate adoption?
First of all, thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'd broaden a little bit beyond sort of how you framed the question. I'd say look at how entrepreneurs, particularly in the region, build with a sustainability-first mindset. Mm-hmm. And so as you look towards multiple sectors, not just climate tech, but even beyond, you're going to see that to be efficient and effective, and to actually be even cost-effective in this kind of market environment, sustainability first will pave the way. I'm going to take a radical example for a second and hear me out. A digital health business building technology to allow surgeons to plug into operating rooms remotely. How can this contribute towards a sustainable future? Right? This is actually a practical example from our portfolio. And what this business does is allows surgeons to plug in remotely, not needing to fly. Historically, surgeons would have to fly to markets like Africa and so on to be able to perform these procedures. They no longer need to do so. They're actually able to provide that guidance through augmented reality, through virtual reality, and to guide people on the ground, because the technology that's built is built in a low latency, low bandwidth environment that allows them to deliver that. So to answer your question, the opportunity is everywhere. It's about looking for it, it's about carving it out, and it's about finding entrepreneurs that can build with that sustainability-first mindset.
This is incredible. I think Namir would have something to say about this, because Namir also in his capacity is trying to enable businesses to become more sustainable businesses. What do you think?
See, I think, first of all, I mean, the entire opportunity is absolutely humongous. And just taking what was just mentioned by Saeed, I'm going to give the numbers of what's basically happening in the climate fintech space and why it's important. We will talk about that as we move ahead. Climate fintech, in the past 6 months, $1.8 billion have been invested in the past 6 months. That tells you the humongous growth that's coming towards this specific sector. Altogether, 400 fintechs are out there. 400 fintechs, $1.8 billion. You can imagine, and everything is early stage. So that tells you the momentum that this specific sector is basically going towards. Number two, if we talk about the regulations that are coming in, right, that is enabling the entrepreneurs to do it. On the fintech side, what has happened just today, Kuwait just announced, for example, the sandbox environment for sustainable and green fintechs. UAE, Saudi, all of them are basically enabling it because it is an extremely key driver. Now, why is it a key driver? Because it plugs into every single industry. Because all of us today, we do understand that personal finance and finances are extremely critical to what we do, correct? All of you today would have made some sort of payment, made a purchase, XYZ. So it basically plugs into every single industry altogether. So this is where I would like to start off with, and then I'm sure we will continue into the depth of the conversations where we can talk more specifically on the way we are basically enabling financial services, changing the landscape.
Thank you for that, Namir. I want to get a bit more specific into AgTech. How we grow things is responsible for somewhere between a quarter or a fifth of our emissions. Today, it's been further fragilized with the war in Ukraine, leading to a desire to kind of deglobalize in line with energy and manufacturing. In what ways have you seen the proliferation of AgTech in the region, Dan?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think one of the big things is interest to begin with. I think 20 years ago, if we said we had a session on sustainable farming, this room would be empty. And I certainly wouldn't be sharing the stage with a VC and someone in finance. So there's an interest in this. And I think that's partly led by the consumer, to be honest. The consumers now in the MENA and certainly in the GCC where we are, they want high quality, locally grown, fresh produce. And so they're driving the demand. So to be able to do that, we have to adopt new technologies, right? It has to be not the old traditional way. And you mentioned the war in Ukraine. Before COVID, before the world was like it is, food security meant balancing your supply chain. So if there was a drought in one country, you could buy from another country. And then COVID came along and it went, what happens if there's no imports? What happens if there's no boats, no planes? And so food security then meant local food security. And hand in hand with security is sustainability. Because if you're not sustainable, then today, tomorrow, maybe it lasts for 5 years, your food production can't be local. And it can't be secure, and it can't be sustainable. So basically, we have to adopt new technologies, and this is what we're seeing by those drivers, by consumer-led demand, and by a need for security and sustainability. So we're seeing it come more and more in the region, and I just want to make the point because we're in Egypt, which is one of the powerhouses of agriculture around the world, but everywhere in the world is not untouched by things like climate change and a need to adopt new methods for doing the way of agriculture, basically. So we are actually, we as a company are even in Egypt because the open field market in Egypt is huge, but it's suffering. It's suffering from salinity in the soils. It's suffering from increasing temperatures. So actually AgTech is a fundamental thing underlying, well, agriculture is a fundamental thing underlying humans, and AgTech is really starting to proliferate because it needs to.
That's amazing. I want to even dig further a little bit. You mentioned Egypt. You guys also operate in Saudi. We're talking here probably more countries, I believe, right? We're in a region that's resource scarce, but sunlight abundant. How are you solving for food security in such a peculiar environment?
Yeah, it's a fun challenge. I'll say that. So I mean, we are, firstly, we're an ag tech company. We develop solutions to enable agriculture to happen in these regions. And I think the interesting thing is we took a blank slate, a blank piece of paper approach to say, if you were to design a greenhouse for these regions, what would it look like? Mm-hmm. And in fact, I have all my engineers and scientists that I employ. Do you know how many come from an agriculture background? Absolutely zero, because we need to attack it with fresh eyes. I mean, we've heard a lot about entrepreneurship. This is entrepreneurship, attacking a problem completely with fresh eyes. A lot of the greenhouse industry came from, look, I'm from the UK, so I can say with some authority, places that have a lot of rain, aren't very warm, and don't have a lot of sunlight. It's the exact opposite challenge, basically. So we've really innovated all the way down from the roof. We stop too much IR light getting in the greenhouse for heat buildup. We have low water systems to grow in. We have cooling systems which just cool the roots, keep the plants happy on hot days. And the big thing is I'm an engineer. So you can only push the engineering so far, and then biology has to take over. So we're doing a lot of breeding, no GMO, but we're doing a lot of crop breeding to be able to survive heat tolerance.
It's a good thing your founder's a plant scientist, right?
Yeah, it does help. One of the founders is a plant scientist, exactly. One of the world leading plant scientists, so that does help a lot. And yeah, I think the other big thing we're doing is data. There is no big data set on growing in these kind of regions. It just doesn't exist because people weren't doing it. So we're really at the forefront of collecting that data, and then once you've got the data, then obviously, as we know from all the other industries, it's a really powerful tool. So I think it's fair to say we've just reimagined the greenhouse and agriculture in these regions as a whole.
That is fascinating. I think a key enabler is part of the key enablement is some part of solar. Saeed, renewables do face a different set of challenges. Sometimes you could say it's a bit more complex, like expensive storage, transportation, intermittency. How might energy tech companies leapfrog these infrastructural challenges to solve for our energy needs?
Thanks for that. That's a great question. If you look at a market like, let's take the continent of Africa as an example, 38% thereabouts, according to research, don't have regular access to electricity across the continent. The way to plug people to enable people to have access to electricity is not going to be to try to plug everyone to the main grid. It's to try to come up with solutions that provide alternative ways in which you can provide that power. And so it's going to be, as you said, whether it's through solar, microgrids, other technologies that are starting to become more prevalent, more commercial, and cost to roll out is lower. You're starting to see that as a portion. The other thing is there's a lot of software and software enablement that's coming up, which will also lead to that. So if we're going to draw the parallel to what we were talking about earlier on the ag tech side and pull into energy, you don't necessarily always have to look at the capex intensive or the capex heavy side of things. There is a world in which software can scale. Software can scale cross-border. It can transcend efficient deployment of capital to allow that super scale. And that is sort of the notion behind venture. When we invested in Red Sea Farms, that was one of the primary reasons why we looked at that business. We loved what they were doing, the differentiating factor there, and the ability to allow that business to scale significantly without primarily focusing purely on a capex-intensive method. And so as you look towards the leapfrog environment, I would say, and back to the continent of Africa, look at what happened from a telco perspective across the continent. People went from super low landline penetration to an average of, I think in Egypt it was at one point, in the early 2000s, 1.2 cell phones per person. So 120% penetration. So 20% of people were carrying 2 phones. Right? And that sort of propagated across Africa. So that leapfrogging technology and telco, was something that we witnessed already once. And there's a wave that's coming on the energy side because of the enabling factors we spoke about earlier. And you can draw that same parallel to agri-tech and other sectors.
That's fascinating. I think none of these things would be proliferating if there wasn't a consumer behavior change. In my opinion, I think COVID has rallied the troops around climate change. We got a flavor of what a global problem it could be. It could be costlier, deadlier. It rallied the troops for us to be here on stage and talk about something that we've known about since '75. Namir, how you're here, or your business is enabling other businesses to become more sustainable. How have you seen consumer behavior change more specifically?
Brilliant question, and I would, this is something really close to my heart as well. So first of all, if you take a step back, the climate change issue, what is it, right? So we need to, carbon emissions are exceeding significantly, right? So today, as we speak, we have 51 billion tons of carbon emission that needs to be offsetted. Yeah, 51 billion tons. So if you were to neutralize that, how would you do it? Now, an important segment is today, now first thing is this, 51 billion tons of carbon emission. Now, the second thing is that the consumer behavior is such that today the consumers, all of you raise your hands, which means you're focusing towards impact and climate change itself, which means globally, 91% of the customers are willing to change their bank, their brands, their e-com, marketplace that they have been dealing with, and move towards a more sustainable player that has an impact associated towards it. All of us are driving, towards this change. Now, after this, the other thing that's basically out there is the side of how do we offset this, right? So consumers want this, consumers are demanding this. Now, the important piece is carbon emissions are a product of consumption. You consume, you emit, correct? Now, imagine if you consume, you emit. Consumption is a product of spending. Spending is a product of payments, right? So you always hit down to the genesis point. Now, to be able to, number one, address and enable the customers, 91% who want to become sustainable, how do you do that? One of the ways to do that is to embed impact and environmental awareness into every single transaction. Why? Because if you look into it, again, a step back, payments. I mean, if you connect payments have historically been, a determinant of your risk assessment as well. For example, the bank can also see what is your risk profile based on your spending. So imagine millions of touch points help this data helps you understand your customer, where he's spending, where you are spending, where you are generating most of your carbon emissions from, and then how can you offset that? So to be able to drive that change which the customers want, spending and payments are the heart of it. So for us, I mean, I've been chairing the Middle East and North Africa Fintech Association for almost like 4 years now. I believe payments is the heart of fintech. This is where it all starts from. And having some bias towards fintech, I would say payments today is also the heart of driving the behavioral change that we all are trying to achieve to enable sustainability. So that's how I would foresee the journey to start. And this is how the customers are changing. Like I said, 91% globally, 80% in the region are willing to change their brands. Now, I also personally feel that we as a region are a more generous region globally versus compared to any other region, right? So people over here are more socially conscious. People over here are more socially aware. And that is only going to lead towards enabling more impact and driving more towards addressing these climate change issues.
Thank you for that answer. And the 91% of the people, was seen in the show of hands. It's being demanded by consumers. But as you've heard from a lot of founders and the investors on stage, it's already hard enough to find an insight in a problem and to address it and execute to that strategy. Now, add to that, there's the sustainability challenge. I'd love to hear a story from you, Dan, on like a time where you've had to mix between the food problem, the sustainability problem, and the scale problem, and how kind of you've solved for that.
Yeah, I think the problem, the biggest problem we've always faced in any of these things is being very early, right? Everyone says first mover advantage in any industry. I'll be the first mover, get the first mover advantage. No one says about the first mover disadvantage, which is if you're there, there's no supply chain. There's no one, in our case, there was no one that knew how to run these greenhouses in the region, right? They just didn't know how to operate them. They didn't know how to do them in a sustainable way. That education wasn't there. So we've had to do a lot and spend a lot of time with training. And even to the point where no one knew how to build the greenhouses. So we had to start building the greenhouses ourselves. I think like it's, we are trying to lead from the front and show everything, but that's always a tough thing when you're a new company, when you're in a new space, when you're a new entrepreneur. Actually, like treading that path is a tough thing, and you have to just do it yourself. I think that's the way we've overcome it, and those situations are just you have to get in and do it.
That's the epitome of being a founder.
Yeah.
How are we doing on time? Well, I think we talked about a lot of high level stuff. I think there's more on the individual stuff that could potentially come from the audience if we can. Please, by all means.
Now, I'll be honest, I've been sitting here listening to you gentlemen articulate everything in a very convincing manner. And I'm asking myself, do I have the nerves to even ask this question? Because I usually get either laughed at or, criticized or judged for asking such questions. So if I may, excuse the ignorance and, just maybe take it with an open mind. But one of the things I kept on hearing is, the issue with the carbon emission. For somebody maybe who doesn't know any better, can you please explain to me what is today's problem with carbons and the carbon emission?
Who's going to take the lead? You? Go ahead. Yeah, so basically, what's basically happening over here in this world right now? The world is heating up, as you would know. Yeah? Why is it heating up? This is the main problem. Carbon emissions are not bad. By the way, CO2 is there. Anything that is excessive is harmful, correct? So what's basically happening here is that the heat that is being trapped, so additional CO2 that we have been emitting in the environment, additional CO2 is becoming an additional blanket layer on the environment over here. So when you have an additional blanket, what happens? If you have one blanket, it's enough, right? If you have two blankets, what happens?
Heat gets trapped.
It's going to become too hot for you, and you just can't take it. This is the actual state this entire global, environment is going through right now. That's why you see glaciers melting. Now, because of I thought you had an additional question.
No, keep going.
Great. So basically, this is the main, if I was to summarize this in a nutshell, being conscious of time, additional CO2, 51 billion of it additional is causing this issue. So that is, trapping the heat and not letting it go back into space. So that's what's basically happening at this point of time. So we need to reduce our CO2 so that at least the environment can start balancing it. Why have we started creating more CO2? You call this the age of Anthropocene. What is Anthropocene? Where humans are actually pushing the environment to its limit. We have actually crossed it. As we speak. So if we do not take the right measures, that's why, different countries have, made the commitments of 2030, 2040, 2050, 2060. If we do not achieve it by that specific time, you're going to be heading towards, unfortunately, devastation. So this is not going to be climate anxiety, but that is also opportunity for all of us to be able to address it.
Great. By the way, thanks for explaining that. I do have a lot of follow-up questions, but I guess I'll talk to you guys after the panel. This is a topic that I'm very, very interested in, something that me and my father argue about quite often. He's an environmentalist. I might be the opposite. I don't know. But I'll talk to you guys after the panel. I don't want to take away from anybody else's time. Any other questions that we might have? Yes.
Hello, I'm Yassine. I'm an AI and machine learning engineer. So you were talking now about that we need to reduce the extra layer of CO2 around so we can decrease the heat that's being trapped around the Earth. But what are the steps that could be done in order to achieve that? Like what technological or steps that we can do in order to decrease the possibility of having extra layers and excess CO2 around the Earth?
Yeah, that's a very big topic. You're right. So the first thing, we should be doing is reducing, of course, reducing the amount we're putting in. But as we've discussed, it's gone beyond that point. So we now need to also remove, right? We need to reverse this. How to do that exactly? Well, if any of the young people come up with that, then they're the richest person in the world overnight. But there are technologies, and there's people trying to pioneer this of how you actually take that carbon out of the air, ranging from take it out and pump it underground to take it out and try to convert it into something useful, to just straight up storage in stuff like building materials. No one's cracked it yet. No one's cracked it fully yet.
But as a start, the mass reduction in energy consumed to produce, if you will, is a great start. If I may, part of the technology that Red Sea have in place at the moment is it enables them to produce crop at a significant sort of reduction in terms of the energy used to produce in a standard setting. And that's part of the technology that differentiates what they're trying to do as well. not trying to sell the product, but trying to make it relevant to answer.
Just to add one thing, I think the best way to be categorize it. So if you pick up the carbon emission breakdown, so the highest emitter is cement and plastic and steel, three biggest emitters, which is almost 31%. Then you have emissions coming in from commercial logistics. Then so cement is a part of building materials, for example. So if you go down into it, there's so much to it. Then you have shipping logistics, you have heating, you have agriculture and food, the way we basically, agriculture and food is almost 19%, if I'm not wrong, of the global carbon emissions.
Yeah, I think it's higher actually.
Yeah, so 21 to 19% in between that. So if you look into categories, that will help you understand where you could focus on. I'll help you right after.
Maybe you'll do what I'm going to do, ask them separately. I've got a million questions. You do have to move on.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for the insights. Thank you
Thank you
for listening in.
Thanks very much. Thanks.